When avoidants finally settle down and commit to marriage, they rarely marry the person who made them feel the most or challenged them to grow beyond their limitations. They don't marry the one who understood their patterns deeply or loved them through their defenses with patience and insight. They marry what psychologists call the safe bet. This is someone who doesn't trigger their attachment wounds, doesn't demand emotional intimacy they're not capable of giving, and doesn't threaten their defended sense of self. The safe bet is often someone the avoidant cares about but isn't intensely attracted to, someone predictable rather than exciting, someone who accepts the avoidant's limitations without pushing for more growth or vulnerability. Understanding who avoidants actually marry and why reveals crucial insights about avoidant psychology and what happens when someone with deep intimacy issues chooses a life partner. The choice isn't usually about love in the way most people understand it. It's about finding someone they can tolerate being close to without their nervous system constantly screaming danger. Here's the psychology behind who avoidants actually marry and why these marriages look so different from what most people imagine commitment should be. The safe bet doesn't trigger their wounds. Avoidants marry people who don't activate their core attachment wounds in ways that make daily life unbearable. The safe bet doesn't need them emotionally in ways that feel suffocating or overwhelming. They don't express vulnerability that requires reciprocal vulnerability the avoidant isn't capable of offering. They don't push for emotional intimacy that makes the avoidant feel exposed or trapped. The safe bet is content with surface-level connection, with companionship rather than deep emotional bonding, with practical partnership rather than soul-merging intimacy. This lack of triggering is exactly what makes them marriageable to the avoidant who's terrified of being consumed. The person who doesn't trigger wounds is usually someone with their own avoidant tendencies, or someone who's more invested in other life areas than the relationship itself. They might be focused on their career, their hobbies, their friend groups, their own independent interests. They don't make the relationship their entire world, which means they don't need the avoidant to be their entire world either. This mutual independence or parallel focus creates a dynamic where neither person is demanding emotional availability the other can't provide. The avoidant can be married without feeling like they're drowning in someone else's needs or expectations. The lack of triggering also means these relationships feel comfortable rather than passionate. There's no intensity, no overwhelming chemistry, no feeling of being consumed by desire or connection. For most people, this would feel like settling for less than they deserve. But for avoidants, this comfortable lack of intensity is the entire point. Subscribe for insights into attachment psychology that reveal why avoidants make the relationship choices they do. They've experienced intensity before with other partners, and it terrified them. They've felt consumed by feelings, and it made them want to run. The safe bet offers something intensity never could: the ability to be in relationship without constantly fighting their nervous system's urge to escape or create distance. They marry someone who accepts their limitations. The safe bet is someone who doesn't require the avoidant to change or grow beyond their current capacity. They accept the avoidant's emotional distance as just how they are. They don't push for more vulnerability, more expression of feelings, more emotional availability. They're content with what the avoidant can offer, which is usually practical partnership, financial stability, companionship, and surface-level affection. The safe bet isn't waiting for the avoidant to transform. They're marrying exactly who the avoidant is right now, limitations included. This acceptance of limitations is crucial because avoidants are deeply resistant to being changed by relationship. They experience pushes for growth as attempts to control or fix them, which triggers defensive withdrawal. But the safe bet isn't trying to fix anything. They're not looking at the avoidant as a project or potential that needs developing. They see the avoidant's current state as sufficient, or they've accepted that this is all they'll get and they're okay with it. This acceptance removes the pressure that makes avoidants want to flee. The acceptance also means the safe bet has adjusted their expectations to match avoidant capacity. They're not expecting passionate love, deep emotional intimacy, or the kind of vulnerability most people want in marriage. They've either never experienced those things, so don't know what they're missing, or they've decided those things aren't as important as the stability and companionship the avoidant provides. Either way, their lowered expectations allow the avoidant to meet them without stretching beyond their defended comfort zone. The safe bet offers practical value over emotional connection. Avoidants often marry people who bring practical value to their lives in ways that justify the commitment without requiring emotional vulnerability. The safe bet might be financially stable, socially connected, good at managing household logistics, compatible in lifestyle preferences. The relationship makes sense on paper even if it doesn't make sense from a passionate love perspective. The avoidant can rationalize the marriage based on practical compatibility rather than having to admit they're marrying because they love someone, which would feel too vulnerable. The practical focus allows the avoidant to avoid examining their own emotional unavailability. They can tell themselves they're married for good reasons: shared goals, complementary skills, mutual respect, compatible values. These are real things that matter in relationships, but for avoidance, they often become the entire justification for commitment, while emotional connection remains minimal. The safe bet relationship functions well, practically while remaining emotionally shallow, and the avoidant experiences this as successful partnership because they're measuring by different metrics than most people use. The practical value also means these marriages can last a long time, despite low emotional intimacy. As long as the practical elements keep working, as long as both people are getting their surface-level needs met, as long as neither person pushes for deeper connection, the marriage maintains. It's not passionate, but it's stable. It's not deeply fulfilling, but it's functional. For avoidants who prioritize stability and functionality over emotional depth, this type of marriage feels successful even though to outsiders it might look emotionally barren. They choose someone who won't leave easily. The safe bet is often someone who's very invested in the relationship for their own reasons, making them unlikely to leave even when the avoidance patterns create problems. They might be someone with anxious attachment who's grateful the avoidant committed at all. They might be someone whose self-worth is tied to making the marriage work. They might be someone with religious or cultural values that make divorce almost impossible. Whatever the reason, the safe bet's high commitment means the avoidant doesn't have to worry about abandonment even when they're not showing up emotionally. This security from abandonment is critical for avoidance. Their fear of being left, though hidden under layers of independence, is profound. By marrying someone unlikely to leave, the avoidant gets the security of commitment without having to do the vulnerable work of actually maintaining connection. They can take the relationship for granted, run their patterns, be emotionally unavailable, and trust that the safe bet will stay anyway. This dynamic is comfortable for the avoidant, even though it's often painful for their partner. The unlikely to leave quality also means the avoidant can avoid confronting their patterns. When you marry someone who will tolerate anything, who won't set boundaries that force change, who accepts breadcrumbs as enough, you never have to grow beyond your defensive limitations. The safe bet's high tolerance for poor treatment paradoxically enables the avoidant to stay exactly as defended as they've always been. There's no consequence forcing evolution because the safe bet has decided to stay regardless of whether the avoidant ever becomes more emotionally available. The safe bet lacks the depth that scared them before. Often, the person avoidants marry is notably less deep, less emotionally intelligent, or less psychologically aware than people they've dated in the past. The safe bet doesn't see through their defenses the way some ex-partners did. They don't call out patterns or push for emotional honesty. They don't understand attachment theory or recognize avoidant behavior for what it is. This lack of insight is attractive to avoidants because it means they can maintain their defenses without being challenged or seen too clearly. The missing depth means the avoidant never has to have the uncomfortable conversations that deeper connections require. The safe bet doesn't ask why they're distant. They don't wonder about childhood wounds. They don't push for vulnerability or try to understand what's beneath the defended exterior. They take the avoidant at face value, which allows the avoidant to stay hidden even within marriage. The relationship remains at whatever depth the avoidant is comfortable with, which is usually quite shallow compared to what's possible in intimate partnership. The lack of depth also means the safe bet relationship doesn't trigger the avoidant's fear of being truly known. With deeper connections, avoidants fear that if someone really knows them, they'll leave. But the safe bet doesn't know them deeply enough for that fear to activate. The relationship stays safe because it stays surface level. The avoidant is never vulnerable enough to risk real rejection because they never reveal enough of themselves to be truly seen. This protection through superficiality is exactly what makes the safe bet marriageable when deeper connections felt impossible. They marry someone similar to them in defensiveness. The safe bet is often another avoidant or someone with significant defenses of their own. Two avoidants marrying creates a dynamic where both people maintain distance, both value independence, both avoid vulnerability. Neither person is pushing the other for more intimacy than they're comfortable with because both have similar limitations. These marriages often look more like roommate arrangements than romantic partnerships, but both people are content with that because neither wants more emotional intensity than what exists. The similar defensiveness means both partners are complicit in keeping the relationship emotionally limited. They have an unspoken agreement that neither will push for deep intimacy. They might both be very busy with work or hobbies, maintaining separate interests and friend groups, spending significant time apart. They connect on practical matters, but rarely on emotional ones. This parallel life structure works for both of them because it allows connection without vulnerability, partnership without emotional risk. The matched defenses also mean there's no one in the relationship who's modeling or pushing for secure attachment. When an avoidant marries someone secure, there's at least potential for that person to influence them toward health. But when two defended people marry, they often reinforce each other's limitations rather than challenging them. The relationship becomes a mutual protection pact where both people avoid growth that would require facing their wounds. It's stable in its stagnation, comfortable in its emotional emptiness. What happens to the people avoidants don't marry? The people avoidants don't marry are often the ones who made them feel the most. These are the exes who saw through their defenses, who called them forward to growth, who loved them intensely and required intensity in return. These were the relationships that felt alive, passionate, terrifying. The avoidant couldn't marry these people precisely because the connection was too real, too deep, too triggering of all their wounds. These relationships would have required the avoidant to transform, and transformation felt like death to their defended self. The people not chosen often haunt avoidants throughout their safe marriages. The avoidant wonders what could have been if they'd been braver. They compare their comfortable but emotionally flat marriage to the intensity they once felt. They carry regret about not being able to receive what was offered. But even with this regret, most avoidants don't leave the safe bet for a chance at depth because the fear that made depth impossible before is still present. They've chosen safety over growth, and they typically stay with that choice even when they recognize what it cost them. The unchosen also often go on to have healthier relationships because they were too secure or too emotionally developed to settle for the avoidance limitations. They find partners who can match their depth, who want real intimacy, who aren't terrified of vulnerability. The avoidant hears about this through mutual friends or sees it on social media and feels a mix of relief and loss. Relief that they're not being required to be more than they're capable of, loss that someone who understood them found happiness with someone more emotionally available. The psychology behind choosing safety over depth. Avoidants choose the safe bet over deeper connections because their nervous system prioritizes safety over fulfillment. To non-avoidants, choosing a comfortable but emotionally shallow marriage over passionate but vulnerable connections seems like settling. But to avoidants, it's survival. Their attachment wounds make deep intimacy feel dangerous. The safe bet offers relationship without the constant triggering of those wounds. It's not settling from their perspective. It's finding someone they can actually tolerate being married to without their defenses constantly activated. The choice also reflects avoidance valuing different things in partnership than most people. Where secure people might prioritize emotional intimacy, shared vulnerability, deep understanding, avoidants prioritize compatibility, stability, parallel functioning, and non-triggering presence. The safe bet excels at what the avoidant values. They might fail at providing emotional depth, but they succeed at not requiring it. This match of offer and need is why these marriages work from the avoidance perspective, even when they look unfulfilling from outside. The safety choice also means avoidants often marry, knowing they'll never be truly satisfied, but accepting that trade-off. They're aware on some level that they're choosing comfort over passion, stability over growth, safety over fulfillment. But they've decided that peace, even if it's somewhat empty peace, is preferable to the constant anxiety of being in relationship with someone who triggers their wounds. The safe bet allows them to be married without constantly fighting themselves, and for avoidants who've spent their lives fighting their need for connection, this counts as success. Whether safe bet marriages are actually happy. The question of whether these marriages are happy depends entirely on how happiness is defined. By conventional measures of intimate partnership, deep connection, emotional fulfillment, and vulnerability, these marriages often fail. But by measures of stability, functionality, absence of conflict, and mutual independence, they can be quite successful. The avoidant typically reports being satisfied with the marriage because it meets their needs for companionship without triggering their wounds. The safe bet may be satisfied if they have low expectations or are meeting needs outside the marriage. However, these marriages often include an undercurrent of loneliness even within partnership. Both people can feel fundamentally alone despite being married. The avoidant is alone because they won't let anyone really know them. The safe bet is alone because they're with someone who won't be truly known. This loneliness within marriage is often normalized or accepted as just how marriage is, but it reflects the fundamental emotional disconnection that defines these relationships. The happiness question also changes over time. Initially, the lack of drama and intensity can feel peaceful and sustainable. But decades into a marriage with minimal emotional connection, many people start to question whether stability without depth is enough. The avoidant may start to feel the regret more acutely. The safe bet may start to want more emotional fulfillment. These marriages either continue in their emotional stagnation, with both people accepting or resigning themselves to it, or they eventually break when one person decides empty stability isn't sufficient and leaves to find real connection elsewhere. What this pattern reveals about healing avoidant attachment. The safe bet phenomenon reveals a harsh truth. Most avoidants don't heal their patterns before committing to marriage. They marry from their defended state rather than from a healed state. They choose partners who accommodate their wounds rather than partners who would require growth. This means marriage becomes another way to avoid confronting their attachment issues. The avoidant gets to be married while staying exactly as defended as they've always been. This pattern also shows that marriage doesn't heal attachment wounds. Being married to the safe bet doesn't push the avoidant toward security. It often reinforces their avoidance by proving they can have relationship without vulnerability, commitment without intimacy. The avoidant learns their defended approach works well enough to sustain a marriage, which confirms rather than challenges their patterns. The safe bet pattern also explains why some avoidants eventually leave long marriages to pursue the depth they avoided when younger. After years of emotional emptiness, some avoidants recognize what they've been missing and become willing to risk vulnerability, They spent their lives avoiding. They leave the safe bet, not because the safe bet did anything wrong, but because the avoidant finally wants more than safety. Why understanding this matters if you love an avoidant. Understanding that avoidants marry safe bets rather than people who challenge them has important implications if you love an avoidant. If you're someone who sees their potential, who understands their patterns, who's willing to work with their limitations while calling them forward, you're probably not who they'll marry. You trigger too much. You see too clearly. You require too much vulnerability. This understanding should help you make peace with not being chosen. It's not that you weren't valuable enough, it's that you were too valuable, too real, too capable of genuine intimacy. The avoidant couldn't handle what you offered because it would have required them to transform. This choice is about their limitations, not your worth. Understanding the safe bet also helps you recognize when to walk away. If they're choosing comfort over growth, if they're looking for someone who won't trigger their wounds rather than help them heal, they're not ready for the kind of relationship you deserve. Let them find their safe bet. You deserve someone who wants depth, who values vulnerability, who's brave enough to choose real intimacy over defended safety.